Hi, good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our webinar this morning. I'm Kim Quinn with SensCy, and I'm joined by a fantastic panel that I'll introduce in just a moment. We do have a couple folks still joining, so we're going to give it another 60 seconds or so before we get started. And thanks for being here. All right, great. It looks like we've got a couple additional folks joining. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Um, Okay, so hello again. Welcome to all of you who have joined our session this morning, Reducing People-Driven Risks in Your Business. I'm Kim Quinn with SensCy, and we're grateful that you're spending a part of your day with us. We're excited to have you here. So I just want to cover a couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. First, we are recording today's session, and we will share the recording after the webinar. And we also have reserved time in our session for Q&A. And so if you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, of course, you can submit them at any time and we'll handle or we'll answer the questions toward the end of today's session. So today's conversation is really focused on people-driven risk. So specifically, that's where HR, cybersecurity, and compliance overlap. So it's an interesting angle of a familiar topic. And today we want to make sure that we really focus on what business leaders can do about that. So I'll get started by by introducing our presenters. So today's conversation is really going to be led by two people who live here at the intersection of people, systems, and risk. And it's interesting because they see this topic from two different angles, yet they have very complementary points of view. So first, I'd like to introduce Maria Silamianos, who is the founder and CEO of collabPEO, where she helps employers navigate HR compliance and people strategy. Maria has deep experience helping growing businesses manage risk tied to hiring, policies, and workplace practices. And she's a trusted advisor to leaders dealing with complex people-driven challenges. So, Maria, I'll ask you to say a quick hello and give everyone just a 30-second overview of Collab PEO and the work that you do.
Good morning. Hello. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I've been in the PEO space for over 25 years. And, quite frankly, what is a PEO? A PEO is a partner to businesses that provides comprehensive HR solutions to businesses, allowing the business to focus on their mission. We're all things HR. So think onboarding to offboarding an employee and everything that happens in between. And why Collab PEO? Collab PEO is a perfect mix of the traditional PEO relationship experience, if you will, with the latest and greatest in technology. And what we do for our clients, which is different from many other providers, is we take the time and create a service model for their needs. We don't pigeonhole anyone. So we take care of our clients at their level, providing them with the services that they want.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'd also like to introduce Dave Kelly. Dave's the co-founder and CTO of SensCy. He's a former Michigan State Police captain and leader of the Michigan Cyber Command Center. He's nationally recognized as a cybersecurity leader with deep expertise in incident response and threat intelligence. Now, as the CTO and co-founder of SensCy, he's focused on helping small and mid-sized businesses reduce cyber risk in practical ways. So Dave, same to you. Would you like to say hello and just give a quick overview?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. SensCy actually stands for Sensible Cyber. Our mission really is to help small and mid-sized organizations reduce the business risk associated to a cyber incident. and really be that trusted guide in helping you build your cybersecurity strategy and providing you with the tools to help you stay not only protected, but better prepared and able to respond and recover should an incident occur. And that's really the core mission of SensCy. We started SensCy mainly because we saw a real gap in the marketplace for the small and mid-sized organizations. Tools are expensive, talent is expensive. And we started to see these cyber attacks increase in this space quite significantly. So we wanted to create a practical, understandable solution for small and mid-sized organizations. And that's what we've done, and that's who we serve.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. An honorable mention to Hadley, who's on with us as well. She's going to help me manage today's session. All right, very good. So let's cover the agenda. So our goal today is simple. We want to help you better understand where modern business risk really comes from and how much of it sits at the intersection of people and technology. So we'll start by setting the broader risk landscape. Then we'll examine the people side and then the cyber side of the business, and then finally how those two worlds together can be brought together rather with clear next steps for reducing risk. So why don't we get started on the next slide? And to talk through the evolving business risk landscape, I just want to start by setting the stage. So, we want to zoom out for a moment briefly and look at how business risk has evolved, especially as organizations have become increasingly digital. They're also more distributed and they're more data driven. So, Dave, as a result, I'll turn it over to you to kind of walk us through how this landscape has changed and what it means for today's business leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the bottom of this graph here, you can see, the massive increase in data that companies store to run their businesses, right? We're all almost exclusively online now. And because of that, it's not coincidental that we've also witnessed, a massive increase in cyber attacks during the same time period. Data is very valuable to your company. It's also unfortunately very valuable to cyber criminals. So, and what data am I talking about? It could be anything that you have. It could be your employee data, your customer data, your intellectual property, right? Anything that you're storing in some digital system has value to these bad actors. So, what this shift has really caused is the need for businesses to view cybersecurity just like they do any other business risk. So we have hiring risk, right? We have market risk. We have lots of different risks that we examine inside our business day to day. We just need to start to examine cybersecurity as one of those business risks and plan and strategize for it. So that's how I see it on the cyber side. Maria, what are you seeing in the HR arena?
Ditto. HR and culture compliance is forever changing. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but COVID presented a whole slew of problems that none of us were prepared for. But here we are, post-COVID, where many pieces of legislation have been introduced as a result. So it's forever changing, fortunately and unfortunately, but it just makes it dicier for business owners. And we're going to be talking about a lot of risks throughout this entire presentation. Bear in mind, our objective is not to frighten you and have you run out the door saying, I don't want to be a business owner or a leader anymore. Quite frankly, we just want to make you aware of the situations, the circumstances, the things that you are faced with every day, and let you know that there's ways that you can help mitigate those risks.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say COVID's kind of an interesting example because our workforces have become more distributed. So
Mhm.
from our perspective on the cybersecurity side, we designed systems to have everyone in the office, right? And so now we need to re-examine and say, do those controls and things that we have in place still work when we don't have as many people in the office?
And then there's a hybrid. People are coming back to the office. So it's ever changing, which really makes this quite relevant. I absolutely love this slide. Things were so much simpler 50 years ago. We basically had two pieces of legislation, OSHA and EEO. Fast forward going into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and current, if you take a look at all the pieces of legislation in the acronyms, it looks like alphabet soup. Unfortunately for business owners, there are thousands of pieces of legislation out there for employers to adhere to, and it's a lot to take in. And if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, we have our federal wage and hour anti-discrimination, the state. And what's really interesting is, unfortunately, states don't often agree with one another as it relates to pieces of legislation. So what might be appropriate in the state of Michigan is certainly not going to be appropriate for California, New York, Illinois, which are three very difficult states to do business with, and Florida. So you really need to be cognizant of that. And then to add to the fun, municipalities have jumped on the bandwagon, and municipalities now have pieces of legislation that relate to employees that work primarily in that. In 2026 alone, what we found is 50 plus significant workplace laws were introduced effective January 1st. 48 state level HR compliance changes have taken place. This is really interesting. 19 states and 49 cities raised minimum wages. I'm willing to bet that most employers don't even know this is taking place. And growing state level AI hiring and employment laws. AI is introducing a whole slew of new interesting pieces of legislation that have to take place, as you can well imagine. And really that kind of touches on a little bit of what you do, Dave.
Yeah, we're actually seeing this compliance shift as well. I think as these cyber attacks have increased, it's caused particularly the government and large organizations to institute mandatory compliance frameworks, right? And so what we're seeing is these things are now starting to have a trickle down effect into the small and mid-sized space. So, I mean, if you're contracting with a larger organization, we're seeing a lot of small and mid-sized organizations now get a questionnaire sent to them that says, hey, as part of your contract obligation, you need to be doing these minimum things in cybersecurity. We want you to fill this paperwork out and tell us exactly what you're doing when it comes to cybersecurity, because we want you to be compliant with this regulation or this compliance framework or whatever the case might be. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of these organizations look at that, and it's such technical jargon that they may not even know how to honestly answer the questions. So it has created a challenge for that small and mid-sized space, for sure. And it's only from what we've seen, if you go back 10 years ago, it was the same thing. There were very few of these compliance frameworks. Now there's a lot of different ones, and they're broken down into various sectors. So if you're in manufacturing, you might have a different compliance framework that you need to um, be in compliance with than if you're a software company, for example. So yeah, the landscape's getting a bit more challenging.
And unless your business is HR administration and cybersecurity, there's really no way of a business owner to be aware of all this, unless, of course, they contract with a partner that will help them. The next slide is a little frightening. Modern day compliance rules. So these are real lawsuits that have either taken place or are currently in the court system today. And you can go ahead, we'll be sending you a copy of this presentation, and you can, go ahead and Google it to see exactly what's gone on. But I'm going to just pick on a couple of them that are harmless, one would think. If you look at FedEx ground misclassification litigation, what that is a long running case where workers' classification decisions triggered massive wage liability. What this means is an employee was just misclassified, and as a result, there's a large lawsuit that's taken place. The other one I really want to talk about, and this is interesting, we did some research. Our chief legal officer really drilled down on this. Rosenbach versus Six Flags. Court interprets Illinois biometric privacy law. If you use a biometric time and attendance system, the one that identifies your thumbprint, your eye, anything, in order to do that in certain states, you have to have the consent of an employee in order to do this. Obviously, Six Flags was not aware of this. Who would have thought that you would have to have this piece on the onboarding package? when you had the employees start working. And as a result, there was a significant lawsuit that took place. These are harmless acts that an employer would do who would think, I've got this great biometric time and attendance software. I want to utilize it so I can measure my employees' time to work and pay them appropriately. They, in their minds, were taking all the appropriate steps to pay the employee correctly. And this is what happens. And a lot of these lawsuits come out of left field. The employer or business leaders are simply just not aware. Another one that we had talked about yesterday, Dave, that UKG cybersecurity breach litigation. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. UKG is an interesting one. I mean, they're a very large firm with a lot of data, a lot of accounting data, a lot of business data, a lot of employee information, and um, they were hit with a cyber attack. Unfortunately, there was a lot of data that was taken by the threat actors and put out and sold on the dark web. They obviously, per law, were required to make notifications to their clients, about this situation and their employees, because there was some employee data in there as well. And I think the takeaway from this, the biggest takeaway from this is and you can go and look at their um, financial reports, but 18 months after this cyber attack, and all the way up to 36 months after that cyber attack, they lost a lot of clients. Their revenue dropped close to 20% over that time period, right? As folks lost trust in the brand, right? And they had to build that brand trust back up over time, right? And let these remaining clients that they had and their new business that they were pursuing know that, hey, we've got this on lockdown now. We're taking this seriously. Um, but I think, you know, sometimes what we see, and probably you see this as well, Maria, is, we're so busy sort of running our business. We're not really thinking about these risks until something bad happens, and then we want to scramble, and that's the only thing we're thinking about, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid. I think really both of us is, you know, have somebody at your side that can help you with these things from the beginning so you don't end up in one of these situations.
100%. And we had also talked, I have two friends that suffered cyber breaches. And it's not the money. It's the time. It's what else did they attack? What else is going on? This one started where their phones were mirrored. And then from there, the bad actor was able to get into all of their business and their personal accounts, everything related to them personally and professionally. And had they had it locked down, it wouldn't have taken as long as it would. I think it took well over 3 weeks, a lot of money and a lot of stress. And when you're dealing with that, you're taking almost 16 steps backwards. You're not being proactive in running your business. You can't. You're too busy taking care of what transpired. So it costs a business so much when they have any sort of cyber breach, far more than they anticipate.
Yeah, and can happen in your personal life as well. We really if there's one thing you can take away from this, it's make sure your employees are trained. Make sure they know how to recognize these things. Make sure they know what they should and shouldn't be doing on their devices, right? And how to
Mhm.
recognize when somebody's trying to socially engineer them into taking over their device, as you just mentioned, right? And that really comes through having a robust training program inside your organization where your employees feel not that, oh, I have to take more training, but hey, this is an employee benefit because we're going to teach you how to do things in your personal life as well, right? Your kids are online, you're using social media. In your example, this went to someone's personal bank accounts, right? I mean, if you can learn these things at work and you can apply them to home, or you can learn these things at home and you can apply them to work, everybody becomes safer. And if you
Yeah.
think about stuff like we have a BYOD policy maybe at work, which means bring your own device. So I'm using my personal phone,
Mhm.
I'm connected to work. What does that mean? It means if my work systems aren't secure, my personal phone's not secure. If my
Right.
personal systems aren't secured, my work systems aren't secured, right? So this is the way we need to think about these things. And it's very similar to, in the HR world, why do we have human resources policies, right? To protect the organization, to protect the policies for protect the organization and protect the employees from inherent risk of doing business, right? So that's where the real overlap exists.
Risk, overall risk.
Yep, good. Let's move on to the next slide.
I really like this slide. It really shows exactly where we're at. This is what you're seeing is an average of businesses where they're at. The light blue, the 44 compliance risk, these companies have policies in place, yet there are serious gaps. So 44% of businesses out there, on an average, have some gaps in their compliance. If you go to the left, the 31% HR risks, these are typically people driven issues, inconsistent onboarding, offboarding, and outdated handbooks, which I am willing to bet those two pieces of the pie alone, the people who are on this phone call today or this webinar today, they can take an honest look at their organization and say, oh yeah, I certainly fit in those two pieces. 16% optimal room for improvement. These are businesses that are locked down, but to take a deeper dive into their organization, there are things that they can do to improve their compliance. And then 9% best in class. So what does that tell us? That 91% of businesses operating are not compliant. They are at risk for a lawsuit. They're at risk for challenges within their organization unless they get these things locked down.
Interesting. Um, so we've covered quite a bit around the HR side of the business and as it relates to business risk. And Dave, you've had some good input on the cyber side of the business, but let's examine it a little bit more here. And why don't you tell us where risk shows up for business leaders on the cyber side of the house?
Sure, this is a good illustration of it. So, um, as I mentioned earlier, there's been a large increase in these cyber attacks. The more and more data we get online, the more and more the criminals view it as valuable to them because they can sell it. I mean, that's ultimately what it boils down to. Or they can, deploy some ransomware, to extort companies so that they don't sell it, right? But either way, it's become a lucrative business, and you know, some of these groups are unfortunately pretty organized. So we're seeing a large increase. I think one thing that's interesting is what we've started to see is 43% of these attacks are targeted at small and medium-sized organizations. Why is that? It's because the larger corporations have taken this seriously. They've hired teams. They've brought in very expensive tools. They've really started to shore up their security. So these folks are criminals. So what do? They move down to, the lowest hanging fruit where it's more easy for them to execute some of these attacks. And that unfortunately today is in this small and mid-sized space. Interestingly, I think in Stanford did a study that said like 54%, I believe, of small business owners think they're too small to be, a target of a cyber attack. But as you can see, a large percentage of these cyber attacks are targeted directly at that size business. Similar to what Maria said about, HR compliance and the small percentage of folks that are compliant, we do something that we call a SensCy score, which is a cyber health assessment to get a baseline to where folks are when it comes to cybersecurity. And only 6% of those scores have actually been in this range of, can you go back one slide for a second? Yeah. So only 6% of these scores have actually been what we would call compliant, right? Or, at least in the area of where you're taking cybersecurity seriously, you're doing something to protect. You're also prepared to recover and you've tested recovery, right? Those are some simple things that you should be doing. The other interesting thing here is this average downtime after a cyber attack that says 21, that's 21 days. What's really interesting is we found that this applies to companies that do not have specifically a cybersecurity incident response plan, right? So if you don't have a plan and you experience a cyber incident, oftentimes what happens is you do things out of order, you do things you shouldn't do, which then makes the incident more protracted, right? So it takes longer for you to recover because you didn't have a plan in place and know how to respond, right? When you do have a plan in place and you've exercised against that plan, practiced it,
Mhm.
that downtime goes from 21 days to hours or a couple of days, right? Now, just imagine if your business is down for that period of time, right? 100% of your focus is now focused on this incident, right? And not only revenue loss and all of that, all of those things. And then for a small business, there's all these crazy stats out there about the average cyber attack, costs $2 million and all of these things. That really is for large organizations, but it's still very costly for smaller organizations. And the average cost that we see is around 250,000. Um, and these types of costs are we need to do response work to bring our systems back up. We need to do what we call forensics work, which is investigative work, to figure out how did these guys get in, right? So then we can prevent it from happening again. We may need to pay for credit monitoring and things like that for folks whose data was impacted. So the costs kind of grow depending upon what type of incident you had. All right, yeah, we can go to the next slide. Great. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, really similar to what Maria was talking about here. So we've developed something called the SensCy score. It's a sensible cybersecurity assessment. And what's nice about it is it's based on a credit scoring model. So even if you're not technical, cybersecurity seems a little confusing. That's the reason why we did it this way. So everyone knows that an 800 credit score or above is a good credit score, right? So we want to see you in that 800 to 1,000 range. If you're in that yellow area, 7 to 799, just like your credit score, you're improving, right? There's still some work to be done. But if you're below that, 0 to 699, what is happening with a credit score? The bank's just viewing you as a risk, right? And so it becomes difficult to get financed. Same thing when you're doing a SensCy score. We would view you in a risky area, right? And definitely room for improvement for you to shore up your cybersecurity.
Great.
I guess I'll keep going here and I'll hand off to you, Maria. So I really like this slide. There are so many sort of synergies between running your business on the human resources side of the house and running your business on the cybersecurity side of the house. It's very counterintuitive. Most people think about cybersecurity as, it's a bunch of tools and a bunch of guys in back rooms, like with their heads into computers and looking at alerts. But in reality, the biggest risk that we have in our organizations, every one of us, is our people. And cybersecurity done well is turning those employees, right, from your biggest risk to your first line of defense. And how do we do that, right? We do that through good training programs. We do that through sending out simulated phishing exercises, right? That where we can see if our people are learning how to recognize when somebody's trying to socially engineer them, trick them, get their credentials, right? It needs to be an active part of your organizational culture, right? Policies, we've mentioned policies already, right? Policies, if you don't have cybersecurity policies in place, how do your employees know how to behave, right? How do they know what they should and shouldn't do? Um, so that whole people component, the last part of the people component, which I think gets ignored a lot, is leadership, right?
Mhm.
Leadership needs to view this as a business risk. So what does that mean, right? If you're a leader in an organization, this should be one of your agenda items when you're talking to your leadership team. And the question you should be asking is not, are we secure? The question you really should be asking is, you know, what level of risk are we willing to accept, right? Based on our budget, and what things can we do, right, to reduce that risk as low as we can based on our overall ability um, at this stage in our company, right? And then as we grow, we should be planning to make our organizations a little bit more secure and a little bit more secure as we gather more data, gather more employees, gather more people that we have to protect. So that's how I see it on the cyber side.
No, and I did a little bit of digging. According to NAPEO, which is the association that oversees PEOs, a substantial percentage of small and medium-sized businesses report difficulty in navigating the complex landscape of employment law. Again, boils down to compliance. There are things that you can do to mitigate these. Businesses often spend a significant amount of their time dealing with compliance issues, and it's not so much the time that they spend doing that, it takes them away from their mission. While a business owner or business leader is much like the cyber, while they're spending time going, oh my gosh, I got a sexual harassment issue, wrongful termination, we paid the employee wrong, we paid them late, we didn't pay the right taxes, we didn't add somebody to the benefits, oops, 401k, we didn't add somebody when we're supposed to. When they're dealing with these issues, they're not increasing their market share. They're not improving their product or service. They're not tending to their clients, which essentially keep their business alive. So it's really, it's a double whammy for the businesses. They're dealing with this issue, which more times than not, they don't have the training in, they don't understand, and they're not taking care of their customers or their employees. The cost of noncompliance and the financial impact for noncompliance can be significant. A business can face penalties, legal fees, and other costs, primarily due to their lack of expertise. And quite frankly, much like cybersecurity, Dave, they didn't go into business to become cybersecurity experts. They went into business because they have this amazing service they want to offer to business owners, business leaders. They have a widget. Here in Macomb County, we're in manufacturing haven here. We have tons of manufacturers. Their job is to build a part and to sell that part, whether it be to, the direct car companies or to tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. They don't have time to deal with these policies. They don't have time to deal with cybersecurity, but they need to be aware there are risks and there are things that they can do to mitigate those risks.
Yeah, I think for both of us, right, collabPEO and SensCy, really our core mission is to help offload that responsibility so that you can focus on growing the business. Like that's the key. Let us help with the risk. Let us brief you when it matters, right? Keep you updated, keep you informed, stay on top of what's trending and what's happening in both of our spaces, right?
100%.
So you don't have to.
Right. Those touch points are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so I guess we talked a lot about risk and it's probably pretty concerning for everyone, but there are things you can do, and I think it's really important. Like, what could you do in the next 30 days
Right.
to make some meaningful progress towards either A, understanding this risk, or B, trying to understand like where are you at on both sides of the house. So we'll just kind of ping pong back and forth maybe. So I'll start with policies, right? We've mentioned this a couple of times, but start with simple things, right? If, for example, one of the biggest risks we see in cybersecurity is people getting tricked through their email, right? So if you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled on your email system, start that today and build a policy that enforces that people have to have this enabled on their email, on their personal device. It's a small thing, it's an easy thing to enable, and it's something that you can do that can provide a lot of protection. And secondarily, start to think about what other policies do I need in place, right, in relation to cybersecurity to keep my organization protected. Maria, what about on
Yeah,
the HR policy side?
ours is more broad. There's so much and starts from the top down with our business owners. But start off with updating your employee handbook, incorporating all the state and federal laws, municipality laws. That's our new thing we need to be concerned with. Remember, sexual harassment, remote work, data handling, which goes back to what you're saying, and making sure that all their systems are in place. It's really important for us to speak with the ones who are incorporating this in the businesses to make sure that they are aware of all the risks. Because the employee handbook is a very, very small, piece of what we do. We administer employment taxes. Those are huge. You don't ever want to, have an issue with that. So while starting with the employee handbook insofar as compliance, what we do for businesses is far broader than that.
And systems. So systems is an easy one for us. So this is going to be really quick for me. Like I always just tell people, we can't protect it if we don't know we have it, right? So I would say in the next 30 days, do an inventory, know what software you have, know what hardware you have, know what things your folks are logging into, right? And get a good inventory of that because then the next step, once you know what those systems are, the next step is then you can plan and make sure that you're protecting those systems. So from our perspective, it's not about specific systems. I think for you guys, it might be more, hey, specific systems like payroll systems and different systems. But what about for you?
Yeah, again, it's far more involved than that, but we'll start on the systems. Who has access to the HR, payroll, and benefit systems within the organization? Who has access to the HRIS? Lock that down. Make sure that who is on there should be on there, and that no one has access that should not.
Excellent. That we'd recommend the same thing. That's actually part of the SensCy cyber assessment is it's kind of examining, are we operating under this principle of least privilege, right? Like, which means if you don't need access to it to do your daily job, you shouldn't have access to it. So it sounds like it's really the same with these HR systems. Training, we've touched on training. It's critical for cybersecurity. We can't expect that our employees know what they should and shouldn't be doing, or know how to recognize a phishing email, or know how to properly configure something, right? We have to train them. Just like you as business leaders who are on this call are probably thinking to yourself, well, do I actually know how to secure my Facebook account? Your employees are in the same boat, right? So we really need to take the time um, to train them and to do it on some sort of regular cadence, right? The way that SensCy does it is we do a short training video 1 month, and the next month we deploy phishing simulations, right? Which is basically like train, test, train, test, train, test every other month. And what we're hoping to see is really a decline in them falling for these things that could disrupt the business.
Agreed. With training in the HR world, it's delivering short role based refreshers for managers on harassment response, hiring, performance bias, and handling sensitive employee data. At Collab, we have access to a learning management system where we can do this on behalf of the employers, make sure that the managers are on top of things like harassment, teach them how to handle situations. Let's face it, in the business world, managers aren't necessarily put in a position because they're great managers. They're good at their job. So it's our job at collabPEO to help train them to be great managers, recognize issues, recognize things. It's something that we do for employers that, quite frankly, they just don't have time to do or think about doing it, actually.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I see that all the time, right? Like you're really good at your job and suddenly now you're managing people, right? Like it's a different skill and
How do
you
I
need to
do
help them
this?
understand how to do it well.
Yeah, yeah, and great managers are often not born. They're somebody who's trained and they're taught how to do a job, and they're great employees. They just need to understand the role that they're currently in and how to administer that role properly.
Next item is culture. So for us, this is like key. Culture is key in cybersecurity. The most resilient organizations that we see have what we would call a strong cybersecurity culture, top to bottom. So what does that mean? It just means that leadership's engaged. Um, they talk about cybersecurity on some regular cadence. They understand. They're asking questions about, um, the level of risk that they're willing to accept. And that sort of trickles down through the organization. We've talked about training, right? We see these resilient organizations are, 100% of their employees are completing their awareness training, right? They're improving all the time on not falling for phishing simulations, things like
Mhm.
that. And leadership is understands or is bought into the fact that, hey, this is just another business risk. I have to manage it. And in order to manage it, it's got to be across the organization, right? So that's what we see in the most resilient companies, the ones that if they were to have an incident, they're much more likely to be able to handle it quickly, respond quickly, and recover without much damage.
Culture, it begins at top, doesn't it?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
organizations that you work with, if the top managers, the owners, they understand the risks and they talk about it, the team members will follow suit. And with us, cultures, where do your employees go with concerns? And it holds managers and the owners accountable. If the managers, the owners are adhering to policies and compliance, the employees will follow suit. The employee handbook is pretty much the guidebook of the organization, talks about what is acceptable, what is not. It starts with the state and federal laws and ends with things on tardiness. It's basically training the employees, and it's hugely important. Again, the top folks in the organization find, in your instance, cybersecurity is incredibly important. They want to protect the data of the organization, protect the organization. Here, our job is to protect the employer and making sure they're compliant. And it starts at top and it works its way down. And training is a big part of that.
absolutely. Next one is assessment. I think we actually have a slide where we can talk about this, but what I want to say about this is the first thing you should do is just find out where you are, right? Engage with an organization that can help you determine where you're at, right? And that's what for us, a cybersecurity assessment will let you know based on your SensCy score that we talked about earlier, exactly where you stand. It's easy to understand because it's based on a credit scoring model, right? So you'll have a good understanding of where you are, and we'll provide you a report card that says here's where you're doing well, and here's where you need to improve, right? So whether it's us or someone else, just get started, right? Get an assessment, figure out where you're at so that you can then build the plan to improve.
And the same thing holds true for collab. We have an HR assessment, a few questions that really focus and hone in on their HR, their compliance, things of that nature that will tell us exactly where they're at. It's a quick, there we go, the quick 10-minute survey. Thank you, Hadley. A quick 10-minute survey where we can speak to the business owners, speak to the leaders, and find out exactly where they're at, show them where their gaps are, and show them where we can assist them. But HR is so much more than compliance, although compliance is a huge piece of that. It's the payroll, it's the employee benefits, it's the paying the taxes, the workers' compensation. There's so many pieces that go into human resource administration. But taking this quick survey will give us a pretty good idea of where you stand and where there are gaps where we can help you.
Yeah, and for us, it's a 30-minute guided questionnaire. We'll walk you through it. It's 39 questions. It covers 106 data points of what we call the National Institute of Standards and Technology framework, right? And then it's an algorithm that will then spit out your score. So for those of you who don't know, the NIST framework is kind of the baseline framework that of which all of these other compliance frameworks are built off of, right? So you've probably heard of HIPAA and all these other, sort of acronyms that are out there, but all of them are based on NIST. So this is a NIST-based cybersecurity assessment. And at the end of that assessment, you'll get your score and you'll know where you are. And I think we've included a couple of QR codes down here, Kim, to help. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you right to either one of these places, and you can just get started and see where you're at.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. You guys are making my job so easy for me today. So it was really good dialogue. I think particularly on the last slide, it was funny to me how listening to you both cover, we've said a couple times or referred to this side of the house, that side of the house throughout this presentation. It was interesting to hear you both kind of cover. Dave, you covered a lot of people and HR related components, and Maria, conversely, you did the same thing around data protection and protecting the business and employees and ultimately the employer. And I think that just really underscores really the overlap. And at the end of the day, it really does come down to people. So it's fascinating. It was really good discussion. So I think just to cover up on this slide before we move into our Q&A portion of today's webinar, we will be sending a follow-up communication. You can expect to see it probably tomorrow morning. There will be a link to today's presentation. If you prefer not to sign up for any of these, either of these assessments, using your phone, we'll provide links in the email that you can use to actually register yourself for these no cost, no obligation assessments via your PC. So you can expect that, as I mentioned, tomorrow morning. And then let's go into questions. And to kind of kick us off and to cover the real estate here, I see that we have Q&A and chat enabled in today's session. You're welcome to use either to submit your question. Over the next couple of minutes, we'll just monitor both. So if you have a question or an input, please, use those features to go ahead and submit those. And while we wait for questions to come in, I feel like maybe Dave, it's a good opportunity for me to ask you about something that we get asked quite often, and that's around this topic of artificial intelligence. And we, certainly have a lot of questions coming our way around the way that AI has impacted cybersecurity. And I'd love to get your take on that. And maybe if Maria, you have thoughts on how that is changed or how it is changing your world, I'd love to. And I think our attendees as well would love to hear it. But Dave, why don't you start? What are your thoughts here?
Sure. I think the first thing you need to think about when it comes to AI, and we have this kind of saying in technology that if if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So if you
Mhm.
think of free apps like social media, yeah, it's free to you, but they're using all of your data, they're sourcing you ads, they're, trying to determine everything that you do in your life, right? It's the same thing with these free apps, AI apps, right? They are taking your data, everything you put into that system, everything you upload into that system, and using it to train the model. So the first thing you need to be aware of as an organization is make sure your people are not putting any company information to something that's free. Once you pay for one of these tools, right? Even something as simple as ChatGPT, right? Once you go to the paid version of that, then you can lock it down and say, hey, I don't want my data to be shared um, with anyone, right? And that's only possible when you're paying for those solutions. So, first thing I would say is get your house in order and make sure people inside your organization are not using any of these free tools. Um, Secondly, it goes back to what? Policy, right? We need to guide our
Mhm.
people, right? We need to tell them what they should and shouldn't be doing when it comes to these AI applications. So it's one of the standard things that we have in our solution is a policy, cybersecurity policy library, and one of those policies is an AI policy for this exact reason.
Good, helpful. What are your thoughts, Maria?
I agree wholeheartedly with what Dave just said. The same policies apply as it relates to HR. Our challenge is social media primarily, and how employees of organizations need to be hyper focused on what they put out there because we live in a contentious world, and unfortunately a lot of things are being put out there in social media that could harm an organization. So it's really important to make sure the employee handbook covers social media, things of that nature, and to be cognizant of that. And when they work for an organization, they need to be very conscientious about what they put out there. So while AI, it pretty much is in agreement with what Dave is saying, but ours takes it a step further because the employees represent an organization to the outside world, and they really need to make sure that what they're putting out there is in line with the organization.
Yeah, good guidance. And then Maria, question for you. So um, as we think about, the regulatory environment for small to mid-sized business owners, is there a particular law, or you mentioned kind of the municipality as a growing area? Like, is there something that we should highlight that is a larger gotcha or, a particular regulation that you see employers surprised by or most unaware of?
The one that's catching employers the most right now is a piece of legislation that was introduced in Michigan last February, one of Governor Whitmer's laws. It's on the paid time off. And most employers out there don't know how to track it, what to do with it, how to incorporate it in their handbook. And that's a big gotcha. Penalties and fines could be very great. And you really need to work with somebody who fully understands that in order to incorporate that properly into your employee handbook and ensure that those hours are being tracked properly.
Good.
That's a tricky one to navigate.
Okay, good, helpful. Thank you. So I think that wraps up the questions that we've received. Are there any final thoughts before we go ahead and wrap? I mean, we talked about, it's important to really focus the next 30 days on understanding where some of the topics we've discussed are focused in risk that might be present in your business. But anything that you would like to add before we wrap?
Uh,
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
oh, okay. Sorry about that. I was just gonna say, like, don't be alarmed by all of this stuff. That's not the intention today. Just get started, right? The intention today is really to just make you aware of things and encourage you to just get started to understand where you are. That's what I'd like to leave it with. And sorry about stepping on you there, Marie. My
Not
apologies.
even a little bit. No, thank you. And you're 100% spot on. As you know, our contact information is readily available. If you have any questions after this event, I'm sure that tomorrow you'll think, oh, shoot, I should have asked that question. I was really wondering about that. There's just so much that goes into both these spaces. And again, it wasn't to, sound the alarms, but just make you aware. There's a lot out there, especially in the compliance world. Cyber security and buttoning that down, unfortunately, that's a problem that started several years ago, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. Unfortunately, these bad actors are becoming more savvy, and you really need to button down that part of your business. The same thing applies to HR. New pieces of legislation are being introduced all the time, and unfortunately, there are employees out there that know the system. And my favorite saying, and my team members, if they're watching this, are rolling their eyes. Anyone with $40 and a bad attitude can sue an employer. So it's really important to keep your policies in place, be aware, and allow somebody like Collab or SensCy to take a look at what you've got going on. We'll be very objective and with where your current state is and provide some helpful information going forward. Our job, mine and Dave's, is basically to inform and to assist, and we're here for you.
That's excellent. And you know what? For those that are still on the line, we did just get a really interesting question in the chat. I'd love to get your guidance here. So the question is, any advice on hiring for remote positions? We have significant concerns about bad actors who have stolen legitimate identities coming in as candidates.
Yes, deep fake technology is pretty interesting. Um, I think the best way to subvert that is to, if you can, try to have at least one in-person meeting with the person as part of the interviewing process, right? Don't do it all remotely. If you have to do it remotely, spend some time asking for references, right? Validate that those references are on LinkedIn, they're real people with real jobs, and it'll start to fall apart when you start to ask for these references. But those are two things that you can consider if you're worried about, some of this AI interviewing that you're seeing going on. It's obviously there's a lot of TikTok videos and other videos about it. I don't know how widespread it is right now. We haven't seen it like becoming a widespread thing, but it has apparently happened on occasion.
And that goes back to my point on bad actors becoming far more creative. We have very close relationships with our clients and we work very closely with them. So the directive would always come from a client. And at that point, it's our job to really train the client and tell them exactly how to identify, how to acknowledge, obtain certain pieces of information. We don't hire anybody unless they can complete a proper I-9, and that goes through screening, things of that nature. But there are certain things that we do in the hiring process that would not allow that to happen.
Great. Good guidance from you both. Thank you. So I think that's a good place for us to go ahead and wrap up today's conversation. Um, Again, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. We received a couple notes about the info that has been shared today has been really helpful and beneficial. We love that feedback. Thank you. We hope that there are some positive takeaways from you each for today's session. So we'll be in touch in email tomorrow, but thank you again, and you all have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.